welcome to Jacob's Porch Presents. Today we're going to be working our way towards the Council of Nicea that we will be talking about more next time in this series on what is the Christian religion. So on our way to Nicea, we thought we'd take two quick steps on heresies that get us there to begin to frame what is going to be discussed once we get to Nicea. The first of these heresies is what's known as Docetism. And Docetism, we see the refutation of that already beginning at the beginning of the New Testament, the Gospel of John. So what is Docetism? Well, it's related to the heresy of Gnosticism, but Gnosticism is a much bigger topic to deal with. But Docetism is a subset of that. And what Docetism is this. Early Christians, many thought that Jesus was not in the flesh, not a real person, but rather that he was an apparition or a ghost. You see, I find it interesting that the Christians didn't have a hard time believing that he was an apparition. It was harder for some to believe that he was actually in the flesh like a person. It wasn't his humanity that was so hard to deal with. It was kind of the divinity part. Well, certainly he was an apparition. He was resurrected. God couldn't be crucified. All these kinds of things. And it began this early heresy that is addressed at various points in the New Testament, but particularly the Gospel of John. The writer continues to say over and over again that Jesus was in the flesh, in the flesh, in the flesh. He's not an apparition. He's a real person. And that's a very important assertion early on that will come up again in a variety of ways at the Council of Nicea and in future councils. The other heresy that we want to deal with really quick, because it begins to edge up right towards the Council of Nicea in 325, is Donatism. Donatism grew in North Africa around Carthage. And you see, what happened was in the late 200s, late 3rd century, there was this Emperor Diocletian over the Roman Empire, what was existing at that point. And Diocletian had these empire-wide persecutions, and many Christians were forced to renounce their faith or die. And they would renounce their faith by bringing their holy book and turning it over to the magistrate and renouncing their faith. And this turning over the holy books, that was called traditor. And you might hear in there this word that we have today, traitor. You see, after Diocletian, about a generation or so later, you get Constantine. And at that point, the Christians aren't persecuted any longer. And so you get this scenario where there are those who had turned over the holy books, the traitors, and those that were martyred, and those who represented that group called the Donatists. And they were called the Donatists because there was this Bishop Donatus who said, look, you can come over from the east, from the emperor and somebody who is wealthy and put in a position of power. You can come over here, but you don't represent us because you are traitors. You see, the Donatists mainly came from the poor. The poor were the heavy bulk of the martyrs. Not all the martyrs, some did have money, but the poor really were the ones that continued to give their life over and over again for this faith to be martyred. And so when it came time to start coordinating what this religion would look like socially across the empire, there were those that said, look, they're now in positions of power. They escaped before. They're traitors. They have no place in this religion. We are the ones that have the pure line of succession. We are the ones that aren't the traitors. And Constantine, the emperor of the Roman Empire at that time, becomes very concerned because this is a growing contingency of the Christians. And it begins to have this fractious tension that is building to the point where he says, look, we all have to get together and figure this out because this is dividing us. And so the Donatist controversy was the precipitous event that Constantine sees and pulls together for the Council of Nicea. And spoiler alert, Donatism is condemned as a heresy, but the Christians say, okay, traitors can be priests or bishops, but they might have to do penance for 7 or 10 years for being a traitor. Ultimately, Augustine, 100 or so years later, says this famous phrase, ex opere operatu, which means that that person that is doing the Mass, the holiness of the Mass is not dependent on the person, it's on the sacrifice of the Mass itself that makes it holy. And that thinking goes on, even still through to this day. But that sets the stage for the Council of Nicea, where we really begin to talk about what this Christian religion is like. When things come together, you get the first official statements from all around the empire. And stay tuned, because it may not be what you think it is.